So at around the point of Days of Future Past, ultimately Hugh Jackman decided he didn't want to be part of this series anymore. Being part of this series constantly kind of results in you being limited to just this. Obviously Hugh Jackman was able to be in other movies, as were all of these actors really. We've mentioned that Cyclops died in 3 because he was in Superman Returns, basically. But when you're known for this, it's time to move on after a while. Every big actor who has this big role that they're known for eventually moves on to other stuff. But when it comes down to it, Hugh Jackman's probably going to be the most well-known Wolverine, and this version of Wolverine kind of needs to go out in a much better way. Now I've mentioned that Days of Future Past is a fine enough ending to the series that led up to it. Honestly, you watch that as the last one, that'd be a fine arc. While it has the unfortunate bump in the road that is 3 and Origins, mainly Origins, the first 2 are really good. First Class is fucking fantastic, and Days of Future Past is a great movie all on its own, especially as a conclusion to the X-Men franchise. But of course there's a new timeline, and if you so want to, I guess Apocalypse, even though as I've mentioned you really shouldn't, but more importantly I feel like it's good to at least check out the Deadpool movies, mainly because they show off what this future became. We also see bits and pieces of it in Apocalypse and the movie we'll get to in, Dark Phoenix. This apparent good future is not as good as you would think. Details shown in this movie and backed up in ways through Deadpool 2 and in Dark Phoenix, it's very clear that in the background, mutants were still not accepted by the human society. They basically became celebrities. There was merch and comics made after them, but soon enough the company that was the remnants of what Stryker was working with, now without the leadership of Stryker, kind of because of the actions of Wolverine, when he was released out of Apocalypse, which I guess is the single reason you should watch Apocalypse, after killing who is in this movie the actual true main villain, Xander Rice's father, he started leading the company, and it became one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I think pharmaceutical. And they dealt with lots of different crops and such for to put in different kind of stuff like just anything that involves corn syrup, which is a lot of things. So because of that, they were able to slowly put in this chemical which throughout the world that actively slowly killed mutants off. Not killing them off, but making them be born less and less as time went on. And by 2004, there were no mutants being born for the next 25 years. By the point we even get to the better future, there has not been a mutant born in a long fucking time. And they were clearly being lessened and lessened throughout the time, probably almost immediately after Apocalypse. And because of events like Apocalypse, and later Dark Phoenix, it's clear that the government, probably because of the connections from Alkali Transigen, less obvious but still very much apparent ways of doing the exact same thing that was in the bad future of Days of Future Past. Sure, there's no giant robots that are blowing shit up, but there is absolutely still big mutant jails that a lot of them are being placed in, and Alkali Transigen begins to be allowed to do all these experiments to some of the people that they capture, that they send hunters after, that they specifically give fucking robot parts to, so that they can go after them. This could even be the specific reason why Deadpool happens at all. Why the whole reason why those weird rando guys are trying to do their own experiments, because their mutants are being born less and less. Point, there were still mutants and X genes, but they weren't really there. Showing you that probably even before the last generation of mutants were still a thing, but they weren't really born. There were recessive X genes. Obviously before Deadpool became Deadpool, he was always a mutant, but that thing would have never come out. And even if they knew that they had that recessive X gene, it wouldn't have ever shown, thanks to Alkali Transigen. Become a dying breed. That could specifically be the reason for the weird lack of people in the mansion. I'm sure they could also be on a field trip like I mentioned in that review, half jokingly. I still think that's probably what's happening there. But But being that Yukio was definitely around during the point of the first one, it could be that there just is so little people there that even when visitors show up there, they might not even see them because they're all in their rooms or in a class. We'll see later in Dark Phoenix that there's a whole country for them, and that goes to show you that there needs to still be safe havens for mutants, that they're still not accepted by society. Sure, they're not being directly oppressed by the government themselves, setting different things that slowly repress anything they can do from the 80s to the 2000s that we kind of see in this detailed thing that led up to eventually the Sentinels going crazy that you can find in the cool little website from Days of Future Past. There is no direct anti-mutant laws and such, but it's the smaller micro stuff that slowly puts mutants into jails made for them and put in camps in almost the exact same way. And the fact that they are still hunted down, but this time not by big giant robots, but guys who basically are robots. And again, all because Wolverine happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time because Mystique put him there. Mystique was the entire reason why the Sentinels blew everything up. History completely repeated itself almost exactly. But if the X-Men and the other student characters that we knew and loved, if they were even born at all, if they weren't killed by the different hunters throughout the next couple of years after the good future that we saw, or even slightly before, God knows, because who knows where Quicksilver went, really. And they're probably in some kind of mutant prison, or they were killed in the unfortunate incident that happened a few years before Logan, and the reason why these two characters are on the run. Due to probably just not switching bodies with his brother, which again was a thing that happened in the third movie. Never forget that was ever a thing, please. Xavier keeps to his original body, which unfortunately grows so old that he has Alzheimer's. A disease that slowly eats away at your brain, which is not very good when you have probably the most powerful brain on the earth. Can connect to people in a big radius around him and stop their fucking minds. That going haywire, that resulted in 600 people being either injured or killed, injured in such a way that they're in comas for forever. Which definitely includes a lot of students, and 7 mutants, a few of which were the X-Men. At this point, I'm pretty sure the X-Men have all been hunted down by this point and basically are all dead, and the only real surviving ones are Logan and Professor X. Normally I say Wolverine, but it's important that Logan is called Logan in the movie that is called Logan. Because that's who he is throughout this movie. As he is hiding out currently as a limo driver, just trying to get enough cash for him and Xavier to just fuck off in a boat to just live in peace, just away from everything. His life has kind of went to shit, and as we kind of saw through him aging a little bit in the Days of Future Past, a look to him that has some gray hairs to him, his healing factor is going away. It's slowly being less and less useful, mainly because the adamantium within his own body is poisoning him. Wolverine would have been way the fuck better off with those bone claws, thanks Mystique. Logan is almost contacted by someone who wants to talk to him, who knows him as Wolverine, who he rejects and really doesn't want to be a part of. Ultimately being met by one of the cyborg guys that I mentioned, that being Donald Pierce, played by Boyd Holbrook, who is a very intimidating figure, whom is very entertaining throughout the whole movie. Basically telling Wolverine to not talk to this woman, who unfortunately finds Logan once again. Logan kind of debates on whether or not he should help this woman, as ultimately she promises lots and lots of money, which would be very good to, get that boat and fuck off. As he's doing this, we do see the very unfortunate situation that him and Xavier are in, and especially how just out of state that Xavier is in. He's just completely out of his mind by this point. And it's very sad to see this character who you kind of grow to respect, who I basically grew up with, more or less, to just be in this state that's absolutely horrible. And I've seen people be in real life, which is just never good to see. And it's played fantastically, because again, it's once again Patrick Stewart, who is always fantastic, and he is great in this. He is so believable as this, as this old, I guess not decrepit, but that kind of just shadow of his former self, a version of Xavier. It's great. And same exact thing goes for Hugh Jackman, just being this tired old guy who just wants to be left alone. genuinely feel for these characters, and you see how just in how horrible of a state these two characters are in. It's a big difference from the great cool future that we thought we were going to have at the end of Days of Future Past. They also live with Caliban, who we saw in Apocalypse, but he's played by a much different actor in this. He's played by the much better Stephen Merchant, who is way better. And I don't mind the difference in portrayal, as again, this is decades later, and kind of after him apparently helping hunt the different mutants, he seems like he is a guy on the run who definitely stopped doing what he was doing because he felt bad about it. Logan almost takes the job, but unfortunately Pierce got to the woman first. After driving back home, we find out that the girl that she wanted Logan to take has followed him there. It of course means Donald Pierce has followed them because he wants to get the girl. We get this awesome chase scene, which is fantastically shot. It's very energetic, but in the right way. Lots of action scenes, especially driving scenes, need to be shot in such a way where you can sense this clear sense of danger that these characters are in, and that this franticness that they are going to be driving in, and that needs to be correctly portrayed through the cinematography, and it never is in several different big budget crazy franchise action movies such as, fucking Terminator 3. There's no crazy bunch of edits, and there is no shaky cam. This is a great action scene with them just driving all over this very small area, them bumping into shit. I love the part where he nearly drives through the fence, but he can't, so a part of the fence has to follow him as he's reversing. So some of the guys get caught on it, and as they try to escape through the other gate, they get slammed into a fucking wall, which is awesome. They're only able to escape because, of course, the girl happens to be X-23, Laura, from the comics, so she has her own crazy claws in her. She has a claw in her foot, which is probably something you'll forget throughout the movie, because she doesn't really do it after this scene. Two other claws, and she is just as durable as Wolverine. So the two of them kick a lot of ass to try and escape. And through a very cleverly set up train coming their way, they're able to separate themselves from the hunters, which is a super tense little scene there. I've seen this movie before, but it still got me to be like, fuck, are they gonna hit by that goddamn train? Trains scare me. Trains are scary. I don't like trains. I don't like trains at all. To escape, they continue going on the run, and whilst driving to the place that the woman asked them to go to, which is this place called Eden, apparently, we find out, of course, her story, which is that, again, Alkali Transitin is trying to make mutants now, but more likely to control them this time rather than have them be part of the population, more as weapons. Very similar to what the government was trying to do once they found out mutants were a thing. Again, history repeats itself very much so. But the woman who was a doctor who worked for them decided that their experiments were fucking stupid, so she released all the kids. And I guess gave them coordinates so they could all hopefully find themselves together. Laura X-23, who's played by Daphne Keenan, doesn't talk a lot, mainly because she doesn't really speak English, but she really says a lot with her weird, crazy, and kind of creepy grunts and growls that she does throughout it. She doesn't really need to say a lot. She is just kind of more or less this sort of daughter figure that Wolverine kind of grows to connect to as the movie goes on. She is a character in her own right, but she is more a plot point than a character, and that's fine considering that she's a child and child actors are not fantastic, so it's fine if she doesn't say a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, the hunters do have Caliban, so they're able to track Logan and Professor X to this little part casino, part hotel that they're staying in, where nearly Xavier does the same thing he did in the Westchester incident, mainly because he freaks out because they basically threaten his life. In this awesomely tense scene, Wolverine just he slowly makes his way to the room. She weirdly has to wait for the elevator, in the middle of it. And he kind of slowly stabs the guys as they can't move. It's a tense scene because as you're first watching it, you're thinking, is Wolverine gonna have to fucking kill Xavier? And that's a very whole scary idea, because if he can't get him the weird syringe in time, which will stop the whole process, then he might have to just do that. Because that they have to run as fast as they can, as Caliban tries to keep them off their trail, which unfortunately doesn't last too long. While they're on the road, some bus accidentally fucking runs them off the road, but they also run off this group of farmers, and their horses escape. And as a horse lover, I'm like, they're gonna get fucking hit by things. So having a little bit of control still is able to convince the horses to come back, and they help them get out of their ditch. They're able to have a nice dinner and stay the night, which results in some nice happy moments that these characters have not experienced in basically a whole entire year, if not a little bit longer. It's a very nice moment, and especially also plays into the movie that was actually being watched by Laura and Xavier in that hotel from before, a movie called Shane, which is a very similar situation to what Wolverine gets into here, helping a small family farm deal with the people who are trying to kick him off the farm. It also plays into certain themes that we'll get to later. Unfortunately, we get X-24 showing up, this apparent sort of clone of Wolverine that's now being controlled by the real main villain I mentioned before. He fucking kills the whole family and Charles in a fucking super sad scene that I was not ready to rewatch for the second time, but hey, I did. I made it past it. That's great. Oh boy. Even though Wolverine is able to get there in time, and with help of the dad of the farming family, they're able to nearly kill X-24 so that Logan can escape. It unfortunately is the last action of that guy, because after burying Xavier, Wolverine and Laura continue going forward, and Wolverine is only convinced to continue forward mainly just to prove to Laura, just out of spite, that none of this shit's real, mainly because the woman happened to get these coordinates out of a comic. Now, two things here. The cool comics that they designed for this movie, they were able to get the rights to have comics in the film, but not the comics themselves. It's weird. But they did have the writer and designer of the original comics come in to make new comics, which is really cool. I'd imagine not whole full comics. I'd imagine they didn't write full ass comics, and they just like put some pages on like a regular magazine or something. But it's really cool, and to find these online, I would love a whole thing of this. Honestly, would not mind this. Weirdly, some of the numbers that they picked to represent these comics, they're obviously, nothing like the stories that might seem to be presented in these in-universe comics. Mainly because some of them involve the Phoenix Saga, but I imagine maybe that was probably written about, because again, that did sort of happen in this, so And also that X-24 is really cool and does play into the themes that work really well for this movie, but it was also almost Sabretooth, which is what keeps this movie from being near perfect, because it would have been fantastic. Though Wolverine passes out, Laura, through I guess just happening to know how to drive a car, sure, I guess I'm not going to question that, honestly, whatever, to get to Eden, which does happen to exist, and have all the other kids who have all a bunch of cool powers. One of the girls has ice powers, and that makes me sad, because that means Bobby was probably experimented on, and poor guy. All these kids thank Wolverine, and Wolverine kind of says goodbye to Laura as he's like, I'm not going to join you, I'm not going to be helpful, it's time for me to go on my own. But he fully realizes that he needs to help these kids when he sees that the Alkali guys are coming this way. So Wolverine, after injecting himself with some medicine that the kids, I'm assuming, stole from the laboratory, he goes off and kicks a lot of ass, but it's not too much ass kicking, because he does have to gain some help from Laura herself, and it's really cool to see these two just go at these guys. Ultimately, it starts wearing off, which it was very unfortunate, as they happen to be surrounded by guys, but thankfully they're able to get help from the kids themselves, really starting to use their powers. They fuck up Mr. Robot Arm, and Logan just shoots Xander Pierce in the head like a fucking G. Fortunately, X-24 is there, and the two of them have a very one-sided fight. Laura is able to fight him off a little bit, but he does take her down, and unfortunately is the reason why Wolverine is shoved right into the log, which is unfortunately where he will die. X-24 is shot by the same adamantium bullet that Wolverine kept throughout all these years. I'm imagining not the same adamantium bullet that was from Origins, because that's a different timeline, but maybe the new timeline version of the same bullet. That would be very weird, but sure. And we get the incredibly sad last words of Wolverine, the character that we've been following throughout all these years, and it's sad as fuck, and that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to cry like a little baby again. Again, because I've already done it twice now, the first time I watched it, and the time watching it for this review. Let's move on. I'm also further not going to go any more in the other part that I definitely also cried about, which was the sad little last words for the funeral of Wolverine, which is the last thing we see in the movie. This movie is a goddamn work of art. It is this emotional, sad movie that is shot and directed fantastically. It's the close-up shots of Wolverine and Xavier that show just the absolute sadness and just pain that they've been dealing with throughout this whole year and throughout this whole movie. And they really show in this fantastic character and set design through this, add to this with this just like depressing, empty feel to this movie, but in a good way. Big contrast as in the later parts of the movie with the homey, very nice feel to that very great kitchen scene, which is great because it's the only parts in this movie that these characters are nice and happy and smile, which is probably the only time they've done that in the last year of this timeline. I have absolutely no complaints about the cinematography, especially in the action scenes, which are just paced and edited so greatly. I have so many problems with the crazy edits and the shaky cam that certain action movies do, and even certain X-Men movies, but there is none of that shit here. Everything is greatly paced, fantastically shot. James Mangold knows exactly what he's doing, and if I wouldn't have had it any other way, I wouldn't have had this movie shot in any other way. And of course the acting is fantastic. I don't gotta tell you about fucking Patrick Stewart being one of the best actors of all time, just in general. God, I hope I could meet him before he dies. And since it was for basically everyone in this film, this is Hugh Jackman's best appearance in this role. He fits in it perfectly, and he just is, well, he lives and breathes Wolverine. And I wouldn't have had any other person be Wolverine. I can't see anyone else. He just become the role now. You really have to convince me otherwise of if the next person who's going to play Wolverine after this can even get fucking close to this. That's how great these two performances are, that I don't want to see Patrick Stewart not be Professor X. I know young Professor X is still good as James McAvoy, but Professor X in modern times still needs to be Patrick Stewart. But maybe someone could replace Hugh Jackman, but even then, God knows. Of course, the other people who could probably be played by another actor, they're still great in this movie, and especially Caliban, who I forgot to mention killed himself by exploding one of the vans that came with X-24. Oops, but he's great in everything, and I love to hear his voice, especially as Wheatley. Just wanted to mention Portal 2. This movie is such a refresher from the bullshit that was Apocalypse. I mean, nobody gave a shit in that fucking movie. Wow, is the acting, if some of the actors actually tried in that, but a good chunk of them either clearly didn't give a shit. James Mangold is a great director who knows how to get the right emotions out of his actors, and also the fact that they had the writer of the original Old Man Logan comic, which they don't follow that really all that much, but Mark Millar was helping in this movie, and hey, he's a great fucking writer, so that's... But hey, you also got comic book writer Michael Green, who is normally DC, but has done other stuff, and he's also a great writer, and you also have James Mangold's friend who helped him write the Wolverine in the previous movie, so hey, you have a good group of people who know what the fuck they're doing, who absolutely helped write this fantastic movie, which feels just as great and depressing for the Wolverine character as the original Old Man Logan. Obviously, Old Man Logan is way the fuck different than this, which had a whole ass dinosaurs and Hulks and shit, which God knows if we'll ever get that in a movie version, but this is the closest and best movie X-Men equivalent of that kind of story. Cool, but not only is it really cool, it's also incredibly emotional and sad a good chunk of the time. Boy, is it. It'll make you cry like a bitch, and you know what? That's great. Because we need a movie like this. Lots of superhero movies are very similar to each other. Big action, explosions, crazy shit, and that can be fun. I love Endgame, obviously, but sometimes we need something that's smaller and more emotional. This movie makes reference to Shane, like I mentioned, and it's basically a deconstruction of the idea. Superheroes are very similar to cowboys in the idea of it's cool to be a vigilante, going on your own, beating up the bad guys. But the idea of this thing not being perfect of does it make you better than the villains of just taking the law into your own hands. You are still a killer. You've killed a bunch of guys. You know, what's up with that? There's a mark left on you and you're now a killer. And that's the idea of Wolverine throughout this movie. And it continues his arc since the whole entire time, about the almost 200 years of his life. He's never really known who he wants to be, and he's been trying to be just a normal person, having a quiet, nice life. But everyone's been calling him an animal, a mutant, a weapon. They've been trying to make him into that. They've forced him to become that almost. But he's always tried to be someone else. And at this point, so many people have been hurt and left his life and have been killed by him or for him that he's just trying to get away from everything. And at this point is on the end of his life. But it's thanks to this adventure of meeting the future of the newer mutants and Xavier trying to push him to the idea of focus less on the fighting and more what you're fighting for, which is really what continues his arc throughout this movie. Don't be the person that they want to make you into, which is more or less what he says at the ending there. It's important for that to be the message of the Wolverine arc, but especially the Logan movie. You are more than what people believe you are and might try to make you become. You're not a killer. You are a hero, and you can do great things if you really try to do that. This sad, depressing movie has a great, hopeful message for the future. Not only a great conclusion to Wolverine with him finding peace and finally dying, but less about the actual dying part and finding the peace before dying because he's letting a good future off. His students from the past were all either killed or taken by a bunch of robots and shit, some of which were totally fucked over by the humans even before that, like Rogue. He almost gave up on being an X-Men or being a teacher, and when he tried to do it again in this much better future, he found out it's not a much better future. To finally make that better future by finding these new kids and sending them off into a better place is a great way to conclude things. And also allows this bad, depressing future that I specifically mentioned, and is the reason I even watched Deadpool 2 first, to have those themes be pushed forward. It goes from this bad, awful future that even almost fucks up the whole ending of A Days of Future Past, and then makes it something that's just even better. That wasn't the good future. That was the beginning of this even better future. Now a future without the X-Men. This plays into the idea of what this movie really is. This is the conclusion to not just Wolverine and Xavier, but the X-Men in general. Yeah, there's other movies after this, but they are so far removed from anything that is X-Men. And the X-Men as it began, at least this franchise, really began as nothing that was really X-Men in the first place, but close enough. And what that feeling was has been just slowly removed at this point. And it's been time to end off these characters for a while. Now we finally have that. Not only are those actors all gone, and they also have kind of this good future to end off on when the series eventually does end. But now we have a full-on conclusion that really ends off the idea of the X-Men. The most important parts of it are gone, and now there is a future that people can continue forward. I don't want to know what happens to these kids. I just want to know that people who have grown up with the X-Men will lead on into a better, more hopeful future. Just like how I hope people who have grown up on the X-Men in the real world will lead into a hopeful future as well. This being a quieter, grittier, fucking darker and edgier version of what people want from superhero films is a big refresher from most superhero movies that again are just big, crazy action. This is what we needed. A deconstruction of the genre of why superheroes are important. Showing that they're not the perfect, cool heroes that we knew. There are people just like us, but they are something to still believe in, and to still look up to, and want to strive to be like. It would be mainly about who Wolverine is as a person and not be this big bombastic adventure, but still being very entertaining. It was the perfect way to end off not only Wolverine, but X-Men in general, and also just a movie to make, just because we really needed a movie like this to remind us why we like superheroes so much. That's why I really like this movie. It's a work of fucking art that will make you cry and laugh and just be like, holy shit, because goddamn, it was R-rated, so they were able to do some crazy shit with Wolverine. Like, the unrated cut of the Wolverine is really cool because you get to see that claws go through people, but you get to see that way more in this, and it's awesome. Also, I should mention, there is, of course, a mention of Logan in the beginning of Deadpool 2, which I don't fucking like, because this is it's a sad, very emotional, and well-written scene of that Wolverine death. So for Deadpool to make fun of that, fuck you. That's not a funny joke. No, that's fucking dumb. That's a great conclusion to that character. So, fuck you for that single joke and not the rest of that movie, because again, it's fine. But unlike Deadpool 2, this movie is a work of goddamn art, and it is fucking fantastic. I would absolutely give it a well done, and it would be the perfect and best superhero movie if it just had Sabretooth. Because for real though, why wasn't it Sabretooth? But that being said, it's still the best superhero film, bar the fuck none. What else is there? There's lots of good superhero films, but they don't compare it to Logan. It's a great, emotional, well-made, well-directed, fantastically acted movie that just puts you through this whole slew of emotions through just, it's, every part of it's great. Every part of it's great. I have nothing bad to say about Logan besides it just didn't have Sabretooth, which again, it doesn't even need. It just would have been even better. Weirdly though, Logan kind of ends off this great trilogy. I mean, obviously it's not a great trilogy. The Wolverine isn't a sequel to Origins, not really, and Logan's kind of a whole own thing on its own, but it's a great trilogy in terms of its production. X-Men was never really how the X-Men should have been, and certainly neither was Wolverine, but he was always the closest to being the same character from the comics, as all of the other characters were just sort of there, and it was very much shown that way in Origins Wolverine, in that the people making these movies really didn't know how to fully show off the X-Men characters. Absolute meddling in production made that movie just nothing like people would have ever wanted from an X-Men movie. And they got closer in the Wolverine, and we slowly got to see what we wanted from the X-Men movies. And it finally comes together in Old Man Logan. We almost kind of get to see this slow progression of the character to becoming what he really needs to become. And very similar to his arc in the franchise itself, Logan finally concludes as the best version of himself possible. From a clear just lack of knowledge of who Wolverine is as a character in Origins, to a much better version of him that just quite isn't there because it's not quite allowed to be yet due to what people think superhero movies need to be. And then finally the allowing of just let Wolverine be Wolverine, for God's sake. Just let him fucking slash dudes up. And this is not only a good showing of what eventually happened to the X-Men franchise, but also superhero movies in general. People thought they needed to be a certain way, or that they couldn't be a certain way. And the slow kind of growing of what Wolverine is, and is seen as to the public and allowed to be by the producers, is a great showing of how superheroes in media have grown throughout the last, 20-something years. I mentioned that the X-Men franchise is basically nothing the way it was in the beginning. It's really grown to be something else, and the little bits and pieces that are even from the first couple are ended in the Logan movie. But also, as is what people think superheroes need to be in general, and we've seen them grow to be much more crazier and allowed to do the things that they should have been doing since the start. Endgame's a good case of, holy shit, we've really come a long way from just kind of having guys in suits beating up random guys. And Logan, even though not being this big crazy adventure, because it really can't be at the time, is still a good showing of that we can now have superhero movies be more than just superheroes, just kind of beating up bad guys. Not only allowing them to be more like the comic books that they come from, but that they can be more mature. Superhero movies back in the first time of the X-Men tried to be more mature, which was really just them trying to be more like the Matrix, but still not really being allowed to be. Why people didn't really take them that seriously, mainly because a bunch of them were still kind of goofy in the fact they trying to be mature, they ended up less mature. Some of them were so trying to be mature that they are just impossible to take seriously. It's not that superheroes are back then were bad because they tried to be too serious, is that they weren't doing it in the right way. Logan's the best case if you can absolutely have this dark, gritty, even sad movie about a superhero and still be called a superhero movie and that being perfectly fine. Superheroes are much more tactile than people really think that they could ever be. They'd be put in any situation that you could possibly want to put them in, and it would still be interesting, especially Wolverine. And Logan is a really good case of how the genre and the X-Men franchise in general has grown throughout the times of people really wanting to learn and understand more, and thus having people be able to put different kinds of movies out in the open. Now ultimately superhero movies still have quite the room to grow because some of them still aren't allowed to do certain things due to rights or marketability, but superhero movies need to grow and to change, as does every single genre. And if that results in stuff like this, then that's fucking great. Logan is a masterpiece and it's really shown in a much different way than Endgame, but in a similar vein, how superhero movies have grown from what they used to be back in even the 70s, but especially back from where they were in the beginning of when they got popular in 2000 with exactly X-Men. I feel like this is the full best conclusion to the X-Men as a franchise, and if you want to watch X-Men, you gotta watch the first one, obviously, sequel, great. Yeah, unfortunately, have to watch 3, but again, it's not awful, as we mentioned. Maybe watch Origins if you really want to, but you do have to watch First Class, and then, of course, The Wolverine, leading into Days of Future Past. Unfortunately, watching Apocalypse just for more context into ending it with Logan, which is all you need. You get some bumps in the road, but you get this good watch order, which leads into this fantastic conclusion to this still very likable, very fun franchise. Unfortunately, though, it's not the last movie, and the remains of the dead franchise kind of come back to life as it has one last breath of air before it finally stumbles on to be just a corpse. That useless fucking corpse that stops Logan from being the best fucking ending to a franchise is, of course, our next movie, that being Dark Phoenix. Not X-Men Dark Phoenix, just called Dark Phoenix. Great job calling it that. I'd rather and did watch Jumanji 2. That's right, this one will be... I've seen all these movies beforehand, but Dark Phoenix, our next movie, will be the first time I've ever watched it. Because even though Dark Phoenix came out at the point of I was like, sure, I'll go see the Fox movies now, I just had no desire to watch Dark Phoenix. I mean, I saw Apocalypse. And with them certainly not giving a shit by this point, because we knew that they were going to give the X-Men rights at some point soon to Disney again. So we'll see about how little they gave a shit, and will that make it a better film than Apocalypse or a worse film than Apocalypse? We'll see that next time, but until then, I've been the Movie-a-Thonner. I hope you enjoyed this review and my ideas of what the themes of Logan are. I feel like I more or less got my point out. Did you like Logan? Do you agree that it's probably one of the best movies of all time? Not just in terms of superheroes, but also movies in general? Well, then leave that stuff in the comments, or any disagreements you may or may not have. But most importantly, stay good, stay safe, and don't be an asshole.